Well, thank you very much, and hugs to everybody. That's a wonderful greeting. Let me share my screen. Okay, so hi to everybody. I'm going to be summarizing the important points in my book, and it's a lot of material. I'm sure people will have questions, and I look forward to getting your questions. Before I start, I want to thank Stephen Shore for putting this together and for inviting me to speak, and John Papadopoulos for his technical assistance, and Nancy as well. Thanks to all. I hope you enjoy it. And, here we go. So we're going to talk about the role that the pharmaceutical industry is currently playing in American healthcare. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, drug company expenditures, pharmaceutical expenditures, account for only 17% of our total healthcare spending. So the pharmaceutical industry will say, how can we be blamed for the dysfunction in American healthcare when we account for less than a fifth of medical spending? And that's really what I want to explain today, how that happens, how the tail wags the dog. The tail of the pharmaceutical industry wags the dog of American healthcare. And the short answer is by controlling what doctors, even the best doctors, believe is the knowledge that should inform their patient care. And with that, I want to start. So here's a cartoon, or half a cartoon actually, from the New Yorker, which is just masterful at capturing our current situations. And here's a philosopher, you can see, with a quizzical, open look. And he's starting his journey towards the truth. And he's prepared to learn what's there. Now, I want to kind of jump ahead in this presentation and give you an example of what that philosopher will find when he gets to the truth. So I had a political science professor who used to say, where they stand depends on where they sit. And in this case, I'm going to tell you what Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna have to say about getting a booster. And then we'll go over and we'll hear what somebody from the World Health Organization has to say. So Pfizer and BioNTech say the potency of their initial booster wanes within 3 to 6 months against both symptomatic infection and severe disease. Data from Israel suggests a second booster restores protection. Now remember, they make money when they sell boosters. And I want to make it clear from the very beginning, I am a very strong pro-vaxxer, pro getting the initial series and pro getting a single booster after the initial series. What happens with that second booster is a little bit in question now. And that's the point I'm going to make here. So Pfizer and BioNTech say their booster wanes and you need a second booster to restore protection. And Moderna's chief medical officer says the only way that we're going to get a period of stability and ultimately to an endemic disease is to keep people protected, keep their antibody levels up. And I'm afraid that means regular boosting. I don't think he's that afraid it means regular boosting, but that's what he said. Now let's see what a woman from Dr. Kate O'Brien, from the director of vaccines department at the World Health Organization says. And I ask you to listen to these words carefully because I think she meant exactly what she said. We're in a relatively weak position on the sort of policy front around exactly what the data are that are compelling decisions about fourth doses. She's giving you a very different message than the Pfizer BioNTech people are and then that the Moderna people are. Now, in the United States, it's the drug companies that get the major share of voice for doctors and for patients. So now we see our philosopher went out looking for the truth and he saw the truth and he's coming back and he doesn't look so happy. And that's really what my lecture is going to be about. It's about what's wrong. A lot of the other lectures, most of the other lectures are speaking about how to improve your health. And I'm going to be speaking about how to defend yourself against a commercially biased healthcare system, and a commercially biased healthcare system that the doctors do not understand. So let's just frame American healthcare first in broad brushstrokes. Here is, let me get rid of this. This is a graph of overall age, of overall age-adjusted mortality. Age-adjusted mortality is a way to be able to compare the mortality rates in different countries, because different countries have different median ages, age distributions. And of course, countries that have older people living there are going to have higher death rates. So age-adjusted mortality corrects for the differences in age and allows a fair comparison between countries. So here we see a graph where the United States is green, and compared to 10 other comparable countries. And we go back to 1980, and we see that the adjusted mortality rate in the United States was lower than the mortality rate in the 10 comparable countries. And although this looks like a very small amount of difference, it meant that 100,000 fewer Americans were dying every year because our mortality rate was lower than the mortality rate in the 10 comparable countries. But if we come out to 2017, is the latest data we have for this computed, we see that the United States mortality rate is now considerably higher than the mortality rate in the other countries, and it translates into 485,000 Americans dying every year in excess of projections based on the death rate in the other countries. 485,000 people. That translates into over 1,300 people a day dying because American health and healthcare have become so inferior to the other wealthy countries. 1,300 people a day dying. That's exactly the same as the COVID pandemic, the same number of lives that the COVID pandemic has taken over the first 2 years. But these data are from before the pandemic. So 1,300 American deaths every day, like 3 jumbo jets crashing every single day. Imagine how that would dominate the news if something was wrong with our airplane industry and there were 3 jumbo jet crashes every day with no survivors. And yet the difference between American death rates and the death rates in the other wealthy countries is not heard. No news, nothing, we don't know anything about it. So sometimes data about deaths in adults doesn't really get to us. It doesn't have emotional impact. But data about deaths in kids does. So let's look at how this affects kids. This is Americans under the age of 19 and under. So in 1961, during the 60s, the death rate for American kids was so much lower than the OECD rate that 32,500 fewer American kids died in that decade. And that's a really good thing. It shows that we were really ahead of the other countries in terms of pediatric deaths. But if we look at the decades that ensued, we see that this changes radically. And that instead of having 32,500 fewer deaths, we start having 95,000 more deaths and 163,000 more deaths in each decade, 189, and then 207. So what we are seeing is that between 1971 and 2010, 655,000 kids died in the United States because our pediatric death rate is so much higher than the other countries. 655,000 pediatric deaths. It's put that in terms of what we're seeing in the tragedy in Ukraine. It's just astonishing how big these differences are. And for the young kids, infant mortality, our higher rate of infant mortality is the primary cause of death. And for the older kids, between 15 and 19, it's gun violence and traffic accidents. So the Annals of Internal Medicine is the board for internists, has been trying to be proactive and taking a stand about reducing firearm violence. And they wrote this essay in 2018, repeating that they're taking a stand and that this is a major health issue. After this editorial was published, the NRA got into the act and they sent this tweet. Someone should tell self-important anti-gun doctors to stay in their lane. Half of the articles in Annals of Internal Medicine are pushing for gun control. This is the NRA writing a tweet. Most upsetting, however, the medical community seems to have consulted no one but themselves. I'm not sure where you would find epidemiologists who would be addressing this outside of the medical community, but nonetheless, that's the NRA's position. A woman named Judy Melinek, a forensic pathologist, responded, excuse me, to the NRA's tweet. And this is what they had to say. This is what Judy Melinek had to say, forensic pathologist. She said, "Do you have any idea how many bullets I pull out of corpses weekly? This isn't just my lane. This is my effing highway." And this is the point that I want to make. This is the point of the whole lecture, is that as a country, we're failing to provide adequate health care and health to American citizens. It's a colossal failure, and we don't talk about it. And the main reason that we don't talk about it is that it doesn't serve the vested interests who are making a ton of money while this is going on. And those vested interests, particularly the pharmaceutical industry, have one primary job. It's not to make us healthier. It's not to improve the overall health of the American people, though sometimes they do that. Sometimes they help. But their job is to maximize the financial returns that they deliver to their investors. That's their job. And they do it very well. And I'm going to show you how well they do it. So we were just looking at kids. Now we're going to go back to the whole population. And the best single snapshot of the health, of the comparative health of countries is how many years of healthy life expectancy is there in each country. So healthy life expectancy means how many years the average citizen will live in good health. And if they have a chronic disease, if people have a chronic disease, say they have chronic renal failure, and it started at age 80 and went to age 86 when they died, and the chronic renal failure decreased their quality of life by 50%, then their healthy life expectancy would be 83 years. They'd get half of those years between 80 and 86 because of the decrement in their quality of life. So this is a healthy life expectancy. In 2000, the United States ranked 38th in the world in healthy life expectancy. And between 2000 and 2019, before the pandemic, we fell to 68th in the world. And you can see in 2010, our healthy life expectancy was 66.7 years. Then it went down a little in 2015, and it went down even more than in 2019. Now, there are only 3 countries in the world in which healthy life expectancy decreased as much as in the United States: Syria, Yemen, and Venezuela. This is not very good company to be in. It's just shocking what's going on. And we hear these statistics and we think, well, oh, that's too bad. It's the poor people, it's the racial minorities, it's the whatever, but it's not us, because we are not discriminated against. And most of us went to college, some didn't, but most of us went to college and earn a good living, and we have healthy behaviors. That does not protect us from this phenomenon. This is an article from JAMA in 2013, and it says the U.S. health disadvantage is more pronounced among vulnerable populations, but it can also be found among more privileged groups. Even non-Hispanic white adults, or those with health insurance, a college education, high incomes, or healthy behaviors, appear to be in worse health, meaning higher infant mortality, higher rates of chronic diseases, lower life expectancy in the United States than they are in other high-income countries. So that means this affects us all. This is not somebody else. This is not somebody else's problem. This does not mean because we have insurance and we have enough money to purchase whatever healthcare we need or want, it doesn't buy our way out of the Americans' poor health and healthcare. So for this poor healthcare, we are spending a fortune. This is a graph of health consumption expenditures as a percentage of GDP. GDP is the best way to, percentage of GDP spent on health is the best way to compare the medical expenditures in different countries. If we just look at how much we spend, the difference in American spending is even greater than the other countries, but it's not fair with higher GDP. It's not fair to higher GDP countries because it just costs more to provide the healthcare. It costs more to pay the truck drivers to deliver the medical goods, and it costs more to hire nurses. So the fairest way to compare spending between countries is the percentage of GDP. And we see back in 1970 that there was a small difference. This is about a 2% difference between American spending as a percentage of GDP and the other comparable countries. And we see how much this has grown through, this data goes through 2019. And we see how the spread has more than tripled, so that we're now spending about 7% more of our GDP than comparable countries. 7% of our GDP translates into an excess spending of $1.5 trillion a year. $1.5 trillion a year. That's like the cost of President Biden's Build Back Better bill, $1.5 trillion over 10 years, and we're wasting $1.5 trillion each year, and we're having an additional 485,000 Americans die. So we're spending so much more money and getting so much worse health. I'll be interested when we get to the questions and questions and comments. How much of this is new information for folks? How much of this you already knew about? So here's a graph that looks at the healthcare system performance compared to spending. And on this side, we have health system performance, and that's based on administrative efficiency and access to care, equity, healthcare outcomes. We have higher health system performance and lower health system performance. And here we have spending as healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP, as I was describing just a minute ago. And we see that 10-country average, those countries group really close to each other. There's no outlier there. But if you look very closely, you'll see that the United States isn't in that graph. It is in this one. And the United States is all the way down here in the worst quadrant of the graph, with by far the lowest healthcare performance and by far the highest percentage of GDP that we're spending on healthcare. So now the question is, what is going on? How can this be happening? Literally wasting $1.5 trillion a year while almost 500,000 excess Americans' deaths are taking place every year. How can it be going on? How can this look like normal healthcare performance to us within the United States? And the answer is that the knowledge climate that the doctors are in, and the public too, but it's important to have the doctors out front here. The knowledge climate that the doctors are in makes sense, normalizes this very poor performance. So how can so many hardworking, dedicated, smart healthcare professionals not be seeing what's going on? And that's what I want to address next. So I want to talk about the epistemologic. That means the knowledge. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge. And I want to talk about how the epistemological climate has changed in the United States to make this extremely poor performance, I mean, historically unique poor performance of our healthcare look normal. And the answer in broad brushstrokes is that the knowledge that doctors rely on and the public, medical knowledge, has been transformed from a public good into a commodity. It was a public good. The purpose of it was to optimize the health of Americans most effectively and efficiently. And now it's become a commodity. It's a tool by which the financial benefits are delivered to investors. And I'm going to explain how this change has happened in our country. So I was a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow in 1980 to 82. That's getting further away as the years go on. But as a fellow in family medicine, being trained to be an academic family doctor, we looked at the difference between what we thought as family physicians good healthcare was and what the medical world thought good healthcare was, the conventional medical paradigm. And I think there were four keys to the medical paradigm at the time. Reductionism, meaning the idea that when we really know all that we can know about medicine and healthcare, it'll be reduced to chemistry and physics. This is an anti-holistic point of view, and I'm sure all the listeners in the audience understand this well, that they want to talk about the meaning and purpose and quality of their lives, and the doctors want to talk about their level of sodium. So reductionism is point one. Point two is that disease emanates in a it originates in a unidirectional, as unidirectional causality, meaning we go from dysfunction at the lowest, smallest level of function, the molecule, the genetics, and so forth, smallest level of function, and it percolates upwards to affect the whole organism. The third principle is positivism, which means the assumption that those things that are not amenable to scientific investigation are not important. And an example of that would be how you feel about how your life is going is not an important fact to a positivist. And that's the assumption that medical education and medical practice is based on. Now, there's some lip service to acknowledging how touchy-feely, holistic medicine is a good thing. But really, the truth is that the docs believe that if you can't study it scientifically, it's not important. And finally, individualism, that the individual is the focus of care, that it's not communities, that it's not the way our political priorities, it's not our social organization, it's just the individual. So when the individual comes in with hypertension and anxiety, it's about treating them with medicine rather than figuring out how that individual is fitting into the social context of his or her family and his or her community and his or her professional role. It's not about that. It's about the individual. And so we treat that with drugs, and we treat that as this reductionist pathology. Now, let's do a little history here. This problem really started, the problem of the commercialization of the knowledge that informs physicians. It really started in the 70s when grants from the NIH, the percentage of grants from the NIH that were successfully funded started to go down. And that meant that university researchers, rather than being able to count on the NIH, university researchers had to start to turn to industry for research money to do what they wanted to do, what they wanted to do was a public service. This is when things started to change. So an article that came out in the journal Science in 1982 said scientists, this is a quote, scientists who 10 years ago would have snubbed their academic noses at industrial money now eagerly seek it out. So it became normal, even prestigious, for academic physicians to seek out drug industry and other commercial entities' money to do their studies. And I can't say this enough, and I may try, but the commercial entities are trying to make money. They're not trying to make health. And as the 70s bore on and people had to turn, academic researchers had to turn to industry to fund their research, it normalized doing commercial research as the goal of the academic physician. And this was a radical change. And then we got another huge change in the 1970s. You may remember that Japan was kind of picking America's pocket with Japanese cars. Japanese cars weren't always normal on the road. It became a new phenomenon in the 70s. And Japanese technology, their kind of pre-computer technology was starting to take over from Americans. And the problem, as seen by our government, was that research grants were being given to universities, but the research products that were developed, that were patented, weren't being commercialized. So the products weren't getting out into society, and therefore Americans were being deprived of the benefits of those research-generated products, and American industry was not gaining in competitiveness because they had access to these new findings that were patented. So the solution was the Bayh-Dole Act, which was passed in 1980. And what the Bayh-Dole Act did is it allowed researchers in nonprofit institutions to use their federal money to develop products, patent the products, and the Bayh-Dole Act let the researchers keep the money from the patents, the money that was made by the patents. The money did not go back to the government. So suddenly there was an enormous push for academics who were doing public interest research to do commercializable research. And the purpose of that research, again, was not first and foremost to improve Americans' health and healthcare. It was first and foremost to make money. And this is where the purpose of American medical research really underwent a radical change. Excuse me. Let me get a drink of water. And we can see how quickly things changed in terms of the conduct of pharmaceutical research. In this graph from the New England Journal of Medicine, it starts in 1994, but if we go back to 1991, the data shows that in 1991, 80% of clinical trials that were done in the United States were done in academic medical centers. 1991, 81%, and then it went down to 63% in 1994. But 80% in 1991, and by 2004, only 26% of clinical trials done by funded by pharmaceutical industry, only 26% of those trials were done in academic medical centers, and the rest were done by what's called contract research organizations. These are professional for-profit companies that do the research that the drug company designs, and they conduct the research and they gather the data, and then they, in conjunction with the drug company, analyze the research and write the reports that will tell doctors and the public what their research showed. But in 1991, when 80% of the public, when 80% of the research funded by drug companies was done in academic medical centers, the academics could use their independence from industry to design those studies in a fair way, to make fair comparisons about doses, and to make sure that the people that were enrolled in the study would reflect the people to whom the study results would be applied. And there was this academic independence that really contributed to the public nature of the information that was generated as a public good. But by the time we got to 2004, only 26% of these studies were being done in academic medical centers. And that meant that academic medical centers had to compete to maintain their 26% of research contracts, which is a significant source of income, which they lost. That motivated a deputy editor at the Journal of the American Medical Association to say, because of the competition to maintain even their 26% of contracts, they were engaged in a race to the ethical bottom in terms of ensuring that the information that was generated would serve the public interest and not the private interest. So now we've got the federal research grants are going down. The universities now are in the marketplace. The president of Harvard University, Derek Bach, wrote a book called Universities in the Marketplace about the shifts that were taking place as a result of the Bayh-Dole Act, that the universities were no longer independent overseers of public knowledge, that they became commercial actors. And now we see that the research is largely, or about a third of it, is ripped out of the academic medical centers. 2/3 of it is ripped out of the academic medical centers and delivered to private for-profit research companies. As a result, we find that now 85% of clinical trials are commercially funded. 97% of the most frequently cited articles are commercially funded. Compared to non-industry sponsored studies, industry sponsored studies are significantly more favorable. They show fewer harms and their overall conclusions are more positive. And the majority of physicians' CME, continuing medical education, is funded by industry. And even 59% of the authors of expert guidelines have financial ties to interested manufacturers. So now we're seeing this commercial shift in the core purpose of medical research. And importantly, 96% of medical research in the United States is about drugs and devices. 96%. So when doctors are doing what we want our doctors to do, to read the medical journals, to stay up on the latest knowledge that's being produced by researchers, 96% of that information is about new drugs and devices. And that leaves only 4%, and only a fraction of that, about 2%, addresses how to help Americans be healthier. So this is the key, the linchpin of the tail wags dog phenomenon, where the drug companies and other commercial interests are funding 96% of the research. So 96% of the knowledge that even our best doctors have access to is designed and carried out for the purpose of maximizing the shift of money from working Americans to the investors in the drug companies and other medical device companies and other medical industries. This is how it's happened. So without any abrupt shift, now 96% of what good doctors know, what evidence-based medicine says, is about new drugs and devices, not about healthy lifestyle and so forth. And I'm going to show a slide at the end, but about 20%, or a maximum of 20% of our health is determined by our medical care, and 80% by how we live our lives. So we've got this enormous mismatch between what is being produced as the latest and most important and innovative medical knowledge is 96% about drugs and devices, where healthcare in toto is responsible for only about 20% of our health. And people are misdirected into thinking that if they want to do the best for their health, they'll make sure they're getting the most innovative new drugs and devices, but they're not motivated to really go put their energy in where the health really is, which is not so innovative. It's not so innovative, but it is effective. And 80% of our health. So as I go on, I'm going to make you more skeptical about the drug industry, and just keep saying to yourself, you can take charge of 80% of the determinants of your health. The ball's in your side of the court, and you can be smart. And that's what most of the other speakers are talking about in the conference. What I want to show you is that not to be, I want to teach you how to defend yourselves against the glitter of innovation and stick to what really will help us improve our health and healthcare. So now, excuse me, I want to show this wonderful study. One sec. This wonderful study was published in the New England Journal in 2005. And remember, only 26% of the commercially sponsored research was being done in academic medical centers at that point. This is a study that looked at the terms of the contracts for that 26% of research that goes on in academic medical centers, the terms of the contracts between the academic medical centers and the study sponsors. And it shows the extreme bias, the extreme commercialism that the academic medical centers have to agree to maintain their 26% of the research. So let's look at where the circles are. So the contracts were, the contracting officers were queried. In your best judgment, would your office, your research office at an academic medical center, allow a clause in a multi-center clinical trial agreement that said the sponsor will own the data produced by the research? So the academic medical centers are doing the research, they're putting their name on the research, and 80% of these contracts allow the sponsor, the commercial sponsor of the research, to own the data, not the academic medical center. And that matters. That matters because 24% of the contracts say the sponsor can put its own statistical analyses in the manuscripts that are submitted for publication. They're not saying in conjunction with the authors, the academic authors. They're not saying anything about the academic authors. They're saying the commercial sponsor can include its own statistical analyses in the manuscripts. And then this one is just, it boggles my mind every time I present this. The sponsor will write up, they're asking the academic medical center contracting people if they would agree to let the sponsor write up the results of the clinical trial for publication. And the investigators, meaning the academic, non-drug company employed investigators, may review the manuscript and suggest revisions, but not insist upon revisions. And the only recourse that the academic investigators have, if their revisions are turned down and they feel it's essential, is to resign from the project and not get paid for their work. So what this says in plain English is that half of the contracts, research contracts, that academic medical centers sign with commercial sponsors allows the commercial sponsors to ghostwrite the article. And the academic authors on the article have no recourse. This is, I hope I'm making the point that this is beyond the pale of what we think of as the role of universities and academic medical centers to develop knowledge in the public interest. And what this shows is the extent to which this knowledge is being produced for the private interest. This is a slide. I've done a lot of litigation. I've testified in front of juries, in front of judges, in front of the FBI and the Department of Justice. This slide, I'm going to show you some slides that came out of litigation I participated in. This slide came out of different litigation. It's from Pfizer, and this just tells it the way it is. Jaw dropping. Hold on to your bottom of your jaw because it's going to drop out. Data ownership and transfer. Pfizer-sponsored studies belong to Pfizer, not to any individual. The purpose of data is to support directly or indirectly marketing of our product. Purpose of our data is not to help people be healthy, the primary purpose, not to improve health, not to improve population health in the United States, not to deliver therapies that are more efficient. No. The purpose of Pfizer's data is to support directly or indirectly marketing of our product. And therefore, down here, therefore, commercial marketing and medical corporate employees need to be involved in all data dissemination efforts. Can't say it any clearer. Their research is designed to make money. Sometimes it makes health, but it's designed to fundamentally make money. Now, this is a slide that was shown in a case that I was in, a case in which Kaiser Health Plan sued Pfizer for allegedly fraudulent marketing of its drug Neurontin. And you'll see that Kaiser prevailed. But this is how extreme the divergence between research and medical science and the marketing goals of the drug companies is. It's just laid out in black and white. And I don't want to spoil my punchline here, but this slide was created by a medical marketing and communications firm for Pfizer to assist in its selling of Neurontin. And this slide was a key, the slide and the behavior reflected in the slide was a key component of Pfizer having been found guilty of racketeering violations. Racketeering, like anti-mafia litigation law. And this was the first time that a drug company, this case was the first time a drug company had ever been found by a jury to be guilty of RICO violations, not just fraud, RICO violations. So this is the communications company telling Pfizer how to be successful. And what they say is that you must align the marketing and the scientific key messages. So what happens when there's a new drug, the marketing people will develop key messages that based on their focus groups and polling and talking to doctors and so forth, they develop key messages that, if they are supported, will optimize sales of the drugs. It's like talking points for a political party. It's just like talking points. So they develop these talking points, which don't necessarily reflect the truth. They reflect the most impactful statements that can be made, but they don't have to be made based on truth. So this is what happens when the scientific data is analyzed and published, and it's not, what is published has not been coordinated with the key messages that the marketing people have developed. So this is independent continuing medical education and publication plan. So, here we go. So here we have marketing messages are developed, the messages that will sell the most drugs, and they're put into slide kits for continuing medical education, and they're put into symposia presentations, and they're put into medical journal articles, proceedings, and monographs. These are marketing messages, but they haven't been coordinated with the study data. Now, you may be thinking that study data is objective, that it is not subject to the marketing needs of the commercial sponsors, but that is not the case. So in this situation, where the study data is independent, and based on the data, there are abstracts and posters, and that gets turned into manuscripts that are published in medical journals. But here's the problem. If you allow the study data to be independent of the marketing messages, then you get inconsistent key messages. The manuscripts may say one thing, but they won't reflect the marketing material that's based on the key messages. Now, the marketing company, offered a solution to this problem. Instead of having the study data going straight into the abstracts and posters and manuscripts, they put the study data, had to go through a filter of the marketing messages. So the doctors never got to see the study data that wasn't consistent with the marketing messages. And once you do that, then you do the abstracts, the posters, the slide kits for the drug reps and the key opinion leaders, and presentations at the professional meetings, and the manuscripts and the publications. And key messages are aligned. And this is the goal of the marketing and communication company that Pfizer hired to help them coordinate this. So the goal is to pass the study data through the filter of their marketing messages before it ever gets incorporated into any scientific or marketing material. And again, this concept is a key part of Pfizer being found guilty by the jury of racketeering violations. So the final upshot, and again, in the question and answer period, I would love to know how many folks in the audience know that this happened. There's an article that was in Reuters. It didn't make it to many newspapers, but U.S. jury's Neurontin ruling to cost Pfizer $141 million. So Pfizer was ordered to pay $47 million to Pfizer was ordered to pay $47 million to Kaiser. The penalty is tripled because of the RICO violations. Pfizer appealed the decision and lost the appeal. So Pfizer paid $141 million. That is what is going on. And the most shocking thing of all for me is I was an expert in this case. I testified for a day and a half in federal district court. And one of the most important discoveries that I made going through the actual data on the Pfizer trials of Neurontin was that the most important trial of the efficacy of Neurontin for diabetic neuropathy, diabetic nerve pain, was a study that was called a forced titration study. So the people, 160 people were randomized to take Neurontin or a placebo. And the people who were randomized to take Neurontin, their dose was forced up to 3,600 milligrams per day. That's twice the FDA approved dosage. And it turned out when you basically make people take twice the FDA approved dosage, 55% of them have side effects. And the conclusion of the article was that people who took Neurontin had less diabetic nerve pain than the people who took placebo. And Pfizer hired a PR firm, and they created 85 million impressions of this study amongst Americans, including physicians. And it got permanently embedded in Americans' consciousness that Neurontin, generic name gabapentin, is effective therapy for diabetic nerve pain. Even though in trial we showed, because we were in trial, we could get the underlying data, and we showed that when the pain scores were calculated for the clinical trial visit before people developed side effects, there was no significant benefit. And what happened in this study is people were forced to take a dose that was so high that half of the Neurontin group became unblinded by side effects and figured out that they were on Neurontin. And that affected, that's why we have double-blind studies. And this turned out not to be a double-blind study because their forced titration study design unblinded it. Yet, and we presented this, I testified to it in court, and it was integrated into the decision, the guilty verdict. And a statistician who did these calculations that I worked in conjunction with published it in a rather arcane statistical journal. And virtually no doctors understand that the study design was jerry-rigged to produce success, and that when you untangle the bias of the side effects, there's no benefit. People don't understand that. And Neurontin is still between the 6th and 10th most frequently prescribed drug in the United States, most of it, 80% of it at least, off-label, much of it for diabetic pain. And that study was fraudulent. Pfizer was busted for racketeering violations. And yet that so-called knowledge is sticky. So the situation we have, this is a wonderful slide that an artist redrew for me. It was in the British Medical Journal originally, and they gave me permission to use it. But here we have a doctor, a well-meaning doctor in his boat, which is named Scientific Evidence, and his doctor bag is back here, and he's looking with a telescope, and he's looking at the information. He is a good doctor, or she, let's make her a female. She's a good doctor. She's trying to practice evidence-based medicine, and she's looking for all the information she can get. And what does she see? She sees the publicly available documents that are the very tip of this iceberg. She sees the peer-reviewed journal articles, clinical practice guidelines, drug company marketing, medical journals, all this public information. She doesn't know, like almost all the doctors in the United States, she doesn't know that the peer reviewers who review articles like this forced titration study that I'm telling you about, she doesn't know that the peer reviewers haven't been able to see the underlying data, which we're going to look at under the water. She doesn't know that peer reviewers don't get to see the real data. They have to trust the drug companies, the sponsoring companies, word that the brief data summaries that are included for publication are accurate and complete. She doesn't know that it hasn't been verified. And clinical practice guidelines, she doesn't know that the experts who write clinical practice guidelines don't get to see the underlying data. So we're going to look at the cholesterol guidelines in a minute, but the cholesterol guidelines, which recommend that literally half of American adults above the age of 40 take a statin, she doesn't know that the experts who wrote those guidelines didn't get to see the data from the underlying studies. She didn't know that. And the drug company marketing, we just saw in this Neurontin trial, the forced titration trial, that the marketing included hiring a PR firm that brought that information about the faux efficacy of Neurontin for diabetic neuropathy to 85 million Americans. She doesn't know that that wasn't true. And the reason why she doesn't know it is because, A, she can't know it. She can't know it. The only reason why I know it is because we had, as working as a plaintiff's expert, we had discovery and subpoenas, and we could get the information we needed, literally get the hard drives from Pfizer's executives and marketing people and scientists, and we could piece it together. In these cases that I was in, often there were 20 million documents, and we could figure out what happened. So what's below the surface, the waterline, is the non-public information. The case report forms are filled out usually by nurses who follow the patients along and do their follow-up visits. And then these completed case report forms are turned into electronic patient-level data sets. The data sets are turned into usually several thousand-page clinical study reports. She doesn't know that you can't see these, that these are not released. The drug companies own this data, and they don't have to release it. And the FDA doesn't release it. She doesn't know that. All she knows is what is public information. And she believes, as almost all American doctors do, that they're doing their job for their patients by relying on these public documents and not understanding that these documents that are invisible to them, owned by the drug companies, proprietary information, she doesn't understand that she cannot know what happened in the study without access to these studies. So if we go back to the 4 principles of the biomedical paradigm, we have to add a 5th principle now, marketism, which the principle says the value of new knowledge is determined by the market, by how much money is going to be able to be made for the investors rather than the contribution to public welfare. So maybe we could take a 3-minute break here and reconvene very quickly. Okay.
That sounds great, Dr. Abramson. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to having you back as soon as you're ready.
Yep.
Thanks. And everyone else, again, as you know, you are here at the 2022 Real Truth About Health Conference. We appreciate you being here. And while Dr. Abramson takes a break, we're going to go ahead and play this brief message for you. Check this out. When it comes to your health, there are 5 primary options that can determine the extent of your well-being. Option number 1, do whatever you want, eat whatever you want, and ignore the disturbing headlines showing the rise of several chronic diseases at alarming rates and the increased risk that you too will begin suffering from them. Or option number 2, you pay attention to your health, but you get your health information from sources that only focus on their own agenda, not necessarily helping you to live your healthiest life. Or option number 3, you don't trust everything you hear and you do your own research, but that takes a massive amount of time, effort, and energy that's just too hard for you to keep up with. Or option number 4, you can watch our free conference, our free videos on YouTube, and join our free membership club, where you can use our filter system to find the exact videos you want by topic and by speaker, all posted there for free so that the largest amount of people can get this life-saving health and environmental information. Or option number 5, the ultimate solution. Sign up for the Real Truth About Health's Premium Membership Club, where you get all the life-saving information you need in a fraction of the time. We've created this option because we know it's just not possible for most people to watch every single word of all 210 hours of this year's conference, plus hundreds of hours more from last year's conference, which means you're likely to miss crucial information that can really affect your health. But with this option, we do it all for you. How? We search through all of these lectures and all of these videos for the most critical data, so that we can specially produce new documentary videos that give you all the most important life-saving information in the shortest amount of time possible. The Real Truth About Health's Premium Membership Club is only $7 a month. You can cancel any time, and if you sign up before midnight on the last day of the 2022 conference, you get the first 6 months completely for free. So again, those are the 5 primary options for your health. Option number 1, live carefree and risk becoming part of today's very grave health statistics. Option number 2, trust the information you're getting from people in industries who are financially motivated beyond anything else to sell more products. Option number 3, invest a massive amount of time into doing your own research and questioning if you're even finding the best information. Option number 4, watch our free conference, our free videos on YouTube, and join our free membership club, where there's hundreds of hours of information for your review. Or option number 5, get straight to the bottom of what you're looking for in a fraction of the time, all from the world's top unbiased experts on health, and not available in this way anywhere else on the planet, by simply signing up for the Real Truth About Health Premium Membership Club at therealtruthabout.health.com. What's the best option for you? And thanks, everyone. Dr. Abramson, are you all set to go? You need a few more minutes.
I am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Okay. So some of the problems with drug company influence on clinical trials is international, not unique to the United States. But the components that are unique to the United States are really important. First, we have no health technology assessment, no formal health technology assessment. So doctors are not informed about which one of the 4 new drugs. The FDA approves 30 drugs, approximately 30 drugs every year that are truly new molecular entities. And it turns out that only 1 out of 4 of those have been shown to be superior to previously existing therapy. But because we are unique in not having health technology assessment, independent health technology assessment, the doctors can't know in real time which one of the 4 new drugs is more effective than older therapy and worth the extra money. We do not allow federally funded cost effectiveness studies. Costs cannot be considered in federally funded clinical guidelines. We have no price regulation, which means that there's a far higher payoff in the United States for marketing than there is in the other countries. And we have this amazing onslaught of direct-to-consumer advertising that only New Zealand has, and New Zealand has such a well-functioning pharmaceutical program that it spends the least amount per person on drugs compared to other wealthy nations, and we spend by far the most. So the consequences of the difference in our drug policy is that the docs, as I just said, can't identify which 1 out of 4 new drugs is truly effective, but it means that less effective new drugs are used more quickly in the United States. It means that the lack of price regulation means that brand name drugs cost 3.5 times more in the United States than in other OECD countries. And the result of all this is that between 2/3 and 3/4 of global pharmaceutical profits come from the United States. Now I'm going to speed up a little bit. I spent a lot of time on the principles of what's going on and understanding that the problem in the cost and the efficacy of our healthcare is fundamentally a knowledge problem. I'm going to present two different examples, diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Now, these are, I cover these, each one has a chapter in my book, and I'm going to go quickly now so that we have time to answer questions. So as I race through, jot down your questions and read the book. It's all explained in the book. So in 2002, there was a study published in the New England Journal that was the real deal. The study was designed to determine how best to prevent people who were at high risk of getting diabetes from getting diabetes, from going from high risk to actually having the disease. And the study was designed, and I should add that this was a publicly funded study. So the job wasn't to figure out which drugs to make the most money on. It was to figure out how best to prevent people from getting diabetes. So the study randomized a group of high-risk patients, high-risk people who did not have diabetes, to three groups. One group was the control group, got usual care. One group got metformin, which is an inexpensive first-line drug to treat diabetes. And one group got intensive lifestyle counseling, 16 individual sessions and then monthly sessions thereafter. And the study was genuinely designed to figure out what's the best way to prevent people at high risk from getting diabetes. So here are the results. This is change in weight, and this is years of the study. And we see that people in the lifestyle arm lost about a little over 4 kilograms of weight, that's 10 pounds of weight, and kept it off. The other folks, the people who took metformin lost a little weight. The people in the placebo group lost practically nothing. So when doctors say that it's a waste of time to talk to their patients, to engage their patients in discussions about lifestyle modification because they won't do it, this is absolutely rock solid, randomized, controlled trial that shows that people will change when they're given the proper information and they're given the proper coaching to make those changes. And in physical activity, we see that the people in the lifestyle arm got to about 7.5 net hours per week. That's like an hour and a half walking at 4 miles per hour. Significant amount of exercise. The others were just about the same, increased their exercise just a little bit. But this shows how effective lifestyle modification is. And the results showed that this is the percentage of people that went on to get diabetes during the study. You can see that the people in the placebo group went on to get the highest percentage, and the people in the metformin group developed 31% less diabetes than in the placebo group, and the people in the lifestyle group developed 58%. They were 58% less likely to develop diabetes. So the lifestyle modification works. Now let's take a look at the context of diabetes. So this is the percentage of people with diabetes in 2004 in the United States, and the light blue color is 3.3 to 6.5%, and you can see it goes up. So that's 2004. And then we add in 2012, and you can see how much more diabetes we have. And then you add in 2019, and you can see how much more diabetes yet we still have. And why all the diabetes? Well, the biggest reason is that obesity is going up. 1999 to 2000, it was 30% were obese in the United States, and it went up some about 40%. By 2017-18. And we know that obesity is directly related to diabetes. This is an interesting study that separated out genetic risk and then looked within each of 3 levels of genetic risk how much role obesity played in increasing the risk. And you can see obesity here, low genetic risk, intermediate genetic risk, and high genetic risk. And in fact, obesity increases the risk of diabetes by 8-fold. Let me skip that one. And we see that in 2000, from 2000 to now, the percentage of Americans with diabetes has doubled. This only goes up 2015, but if we take it to the present, the percentage of Americans with diabetes has doubled. So we know how to cut the rate of developing diabetes by more than half, and yet we see the percentage doubling. And we see that Americans have about 50% higher rate of diabetes than the average OECD country. We see, if we look at innovations in insulin therapy, in 1923, insulin from cows and pigs was patented. In 1982, we had the first recombinant insulin, DNA recombinant human insulin, and then we got insulin analogs in 96. This is an ad, a heart-tugging ad for the first generation of bioengineered insulin, which came out in 1982. And it said he's 4 years old and he's already living in his past. And the argument is in the ad, in the blue box, it says Humulin is outstandingly pure. This is the first bioengineered insulin, and it's less immunogenic form of insulin than that which comes from the pancreas of pigs and cattle. Hence, it produces fewer antibodies. Well, is that true? Well, no, it's not true. The Cochrane Review said about comparing animal insulins to the recombinant human insulin, the Cochrane Review said a comparison of the effects of human and animal insulin, as well as the adverse reaction profile, did not show any clinically relevant differences. The story of the introduction of human insulin might be repeated by contemporary launching campaigns to introduce pharmaceutical and technological innovations that are not backed up by sufficient proof of their advantages. It's an opportunity to charge more money without proven scientific benefit. And then we saw the insulin analogs come along. These are the drugs that are so expensive now that are in the news that cost between $200 and $300 per vial. And we find that the Cochrane Review comparing the insulin analogs to the first generation of bioengineered insulin. And the Cochrane Review says our analysis showed that short-acting insulin analogs were almost identically effective to regular human insulin in long-term glycemic control. And until long-term safety data are available, we suggest a cautious response. Well, there was not a cautious response. Here's a study that shows the use of human insulin, human recombinant human insulin, insulin analogs, and animal insulin. Animal insulin by 2000 had gone to zero. We don't even sell it. You can't buy it in the United States. It's not made. It's not sold. It's been chased away out of the market. In 2000, when the insulin analogs were just coming along, there was a low percentage of use, but that use went up to 90%. Now, the key here, to skip over some of the slides and move along, the key here is that all type 1 diabetics need insulin, and a quarter of type 2 diabetics need insulin. But there are so many more type 2 diabetics than type 1 diabetics that 80% of the insulin that's used in the United States is used by type 2 diabetics. There is no evidence that insulin analogs provide an advantage to type 2 diabetics. So the use of insulin analogs here in 2000, that goes up to 90% by 2010, 2012. For type 2 diabetics, 80% of the people using insulin, is driven by marketing. It's not driven by science. The marketers controlled this. They hired a PR firm. They convinced the medical world that hemoglobin A1C levels should be below 7. There was no scientific evidence to support that. And then they argued that their insulin analogs would be safer to get people down to those low levels of hemoglobin A1C. Well, it turned out not only was there no evidence, but in 2008, there was a study published in the New England Journal, the Accord study, that showed that it was stopped prematurely because the mortality rate in the people who were having tighter control of their type 2 diabetes had a higher death rate. And yet the standard still stayed to have tight control of hemoglobin A1C and blood sugar levels for people with type 2 diabetes. And the American Diabetes Association and the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, who write the guidelines for diabetes, persisted in saying that people, type 2 diabetics, should be treated with insulin analogs. There was no evidence to support it, no significant evidence to support it. And the prices were rising. They went from $21 a vial for insulin analogs in 1996 up to $300, driven by marketing. The countries that had health technology assessment, England, Germany, Canada, they told their doctors that there's no superiority of insulin analogs and that people with type 2 diabetes should be started on a recombinant human insulin, which costs less than a tenth as much as the insulin analogs. So this whole crisis about insulin prices is generated by this $20 billion a year that we're wasting treating people with type 2 diabetes first line with insulin analogs. If we brought the 90% of those people, type 2 diabetics who are getting treated with insulin analogs, back to recombinant human insulin, we'd save about $20 billion. And that would be almost enough to enter all the Americans at high risk of diabetes in a program like the diabetes prevention program that I started talking about a few slides ago, which cut down the incidence of diabetes by 58%. We could enter all those people in a community-based program, YMCA or community health center-based program, and cut down the incidence of diabetes rather than letting the incidence of diabetes run rampant into an endemic, and let the number of diabetics go up and our costs go up instead of making better health and saving money. That's the problem with our healthcare system. In a nutshell, that's the core problem. We'll skip over these. This is a key concept that I came across. Jill Lepore's a history professor at Harvard, a brilliant woman. I have no idea how she does what she does. She writes for the New Yorker and she writes these wonderful books. And she wrote a book of US history. And in it, she was talking about the concept of innovation when it was introduced is not a concept of social benefit. It's a concept, it's a business concept. And what Jill Lepore says is innovation might make the world a better place, or it might not. Think of the insulins now that we're talking about. It might not. The point was innovation was not concerned with goodness. It was concerned with novelty, speed, and profit. And that really, in a nutshell, defines what's wrong with the American healthcare system. If we go to cardiovascular disease, let me see how much time we have. Well, I got to be finishing up, so I'll get there real quickly. The guidelines that came out for statin use in 2013, which made a major change, recommended that half of the adults in the United States, age 40 and over, be treated with a statin therapy. Most of them did not have heart disease. 60% did not have heart disease, 40% did. The evidence shows that statins do not significantly reduce the risk of death in people who don't have heart disease. And you have to treat 100 people for 5 years in order to prevent one non-fatal heart attack or stroke. And the other 99 will not benefit. For people who do have heart disease, you have to treat 30 people, not 100, but 30 people with a statin in order to prevent one heart attack or stroke, and 80 people for 5 years to prevent one mortality. So for secondary prevention, there are significant benefits in death, reduction in death. Can I have 3 more minutes?
Actually, Dr. Abramson, pardon the interruption. We wanted to make sure we would prefer you go as long as you need to go. We're less concerned about the Q&A. We're interested in everything you want to share. So please go right ahead.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So for people who do have cardiovascular disease, you have to treat 30 to prevent a heart attack or stroke, and you have to treat 80 for 5 years to prevent a death. Now, I was the lead author in a paper that was published in the British Medical Journal in 2013. We analyzed the data. We're not getting the primary data because that's locked up and the companies are holding on to it. You can't get it. But we analyzed the data, the best data that we could get. And we concluded in our BMJ article that lifestyle factors, including exercise, lack of exercise, tobacco use, and unhealthy diet account for 80% of cardiovascular disease. And yet you have to treat 100 people who have between 7.5% and 20% risk of developing cardiovascular disease over the next 10 years. You have to treat 100 of those people for 5 years to prevent one event. But 80% reduction with healthy lifestyle. And our article was published, and the leading cholesterol authorities at the Cholesterol Treatment Trialists Collaboration demanded it be retracted. Went to the editor of the BMJ and demanded it be retracted. She appointed an external panel of 6 people who unanimously decided that there was no cause for retraction of our paper. And in the process of the panel doing its work and the editors understanding what was going on, they realized that the people who had done the underlying clinical trial data were not available. And the people who wrote the guidelines did not have access to the actual clinical trial data. So the BMJ editors took it upon themselves to write to 32 lead investigators of major statin trials and request that they submit their data to the BMJ, and the BMJ would appoint a panel to independently analyze the data and tell people what the real data show. Of the 32 people who were contacted to share their data, after a year's time, only 7 had responded to the BMJ. The other 25 had not even bothered to respond. So the editors of the BMJ wrote an editorial. They said the statin saga forces us to confront the deep flaws in our current system for evaluating medicines and guiding clinical decisions. In particular, how can it be right to recommend mass treatment of healthy people without independent review of patient-level data, especially the data on adverse effects? The statins trialists have huge influence, and they have a choice. They can take the lead on transparency, meaning share their data, or be pulled kicking and screaming into the light. This is published as an editorial in the BMJ. You'd think it would change the world. It didn't. It did not. The data were never turned over. This was written in 2015. The data were never turned over, and we still don't know what that data show. So half of American adults are recommended to take statins, and 60% of that half is primary prevention without a history of cardiovascular disease. And we just plain don't know what the data show. And this is an absurd situation where healthcare, it just exposes the extent to which healthcare is a financial proposition and not a health generating proposition. So our conclusions: the primary purpose of most new medical knowledge is to support the use of drugs and devices, not necessarily to promote efficiency, efficacy, or well-being. Doctors and other healthcare providers need but cannot get accurate, reasonably complete, and epidemiologically balanced data. Industry and government are unlikely to rectify these problems, And what is the real conclusion here? Take responsibility for your own health. This slide shows that 20% of our health is determined by healthcare, and the other 80% are determined by health behaviors, socioeconomic factors, and physical environment. It's hard to do something about your socioeconomic factors, and I could come back and give another 2-hour lecture about the increasing disparities in the distribution of income and wealth in the United States as a health problem. But the bottom line is 20% of our health is healthcare, 80% has to do with social factors, and the situation is very broken, and it's imperative that you take control of the things you can take control of to maintain and improve your health. How do we go forward? Rebalance medical spending and social spending. In the United States, we are way off the charts in terms of the ratio of social spending to health spending. We're reversed. We're standing on our head. And why is that? It's because of this epistemological problem where the knowledge that's created is about new drugs and devices. They cost a lot of money, and they pull a whole lot of money into the healthcare system, and they pull it out of social spending, which the other wealthy countries spend on, and they have much better health, and they spend a lot less on healthcare and a higher quality of life. Rebalance the medical research agenda to reflect epidemiological needs, not the financial goals of the sponsors of the research. Mandate pre-publication data, transparency, and peer review. We cannot go forward with doctors thinking they're practicing evidence-based medicine when the evidence-based medicine is not based on evidence. It's absurd. And we've got to get this message out to doctors. So if you do buy my book and you read it, please loan it to your doctor to read, because your doctor does not understand this. I can guarantee you that. And we must implement health technology assessment and cost effectiveness studies. It's craziness to be spending $1.5 trillion extra and not even know what we're spending it on. Finally, make democracy work. Americans want drug price controls. They understand that the drug companies are interested in profits first and foremost. And in fact, that's what corporations should do. They should maximize the return on investment to their investors. That's what corporations do in the United States. The issue is that we need referees. The market is not fulfilling any social responsibility without guardrails that are provided by government. It just doesn't work. It's market failure. And the companies are doing what they're supposed to do. It would be as if we were playing professional football games with no officials, and we were letting the football players call their own fouls. That's an absurd situation. It would turn into absolute mayhem. It would be a death brawl in the middle of the football field if we tried to do that. And that's what we have going on in our healthcare system. So the last word I want to say is thank you for your attention and the privilege of sharing these ideas with you. Thanks to the conference organizers, and take care of yourselves. Eat well, exercise, don't smoke, drink in moderation if you drink, and take care of yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abramson. I never want to make it about me, but I am absolutely outraged. You know, we think we know this stuff, and you know, there are just so many different angles to the real truth about health. And this is yet another one that we all need to be aware of. And thank you for everything that you shared here today. Obviously, there's your book. Before we jump into the Q&A, want to make sure, once again, if people want to reach out to you directly or they want to find your book, just remind us again, where's the best place to get a hold of you and all of those things?
Use the email. You guys have my email on your website.
Perfect. Okay. And that's at therealtruthabout.health.com, I believe, folks. So with that, we do have a few minutes for questions. I see a few hands raised, and just to make sure everybody understands how we go about that here, if this is your first time joining us, We normally do not take questions directly from the chat box, but we ask everyone to raise their hand with a question. In case you don't know how to raise your hand, everyone, what you do is you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will see different tabs, and one of those tabs is called your reactions tab. Click on your reactions tab. A few different emojis will pop up. One of them says raise hand. You click on that function, and we'll see your raised hand come in. We then go ahead and take your raised hands or questions in the order in which we receive them. Again, I see some coming in now. That's great. Keep them coming, folks, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can in our allotted time. I will unmute you and call out your name by first name, and we can take your question for Dr. Abramson. So all set, Doc, ready to go?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you again. And so our first question is coming in from Deborah. I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, yeah, good morning. I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to say that I was familiar with some of this, but what you said is obviously jaw-dropping. The book, The Constant Gardener, came out in like 2000 and something and brought light. I don't know if it was true or not, but
let me interject. It is based on a Canadian friend's actual experiences, a woman who did hematology research.
Right. And I lived 32 years in Africa, so I saw a lot of that kind of situation firsthand with the drug companies, and had a member of my family work 20 years for Pfizer. So I'm a little bit knowledgeable on some of this stuff. What I wanted to ask today was, you brought to light the kind of problem with the studies with some of these major drugs. But it made me wonder, a lot of the things we're listening to at this conference, and what I'm grasping at, I guess, through doctors, some doctors at Harvard who are studying health, nutrition, longevity, functional medicine, everything else, are quoting all these studies, maybe not on, some on metformin, some on mainline drugs, but others on supplements and other things. And it made me wonder, are any of these studies that I hear that are quoted that seem to add legitimacy to either a food I'm going to eat, or a vitamin I'm going to take, or a lifestyle change I'm going to make? Is any of that true? Because I'm beginning to think none of it's true now.
I can't comment on that. I don't know the answer. Some of those studies are real world data, like the data showing that the COVID vaccination, the initial vaccination, reduces serious illness and death, even though we know that the drug companies are holding on to data, and that we don't have all the data. We have real world data. So some of those studies are based on real world data. And I think to the extent that you trust the integrity of the researchers, you can trust that material. Do look at conflicts of interest. They don't, conflicts of interest are not always declared, but they often are, and they matter. People, I'm not saying that academic researchers will get swayed because they're getting paid to do research, but commercial entities hire academic researchers who tend to share their point of view, or they wouldn't be hiring that. They're not hiring me, I'll tell you that. So you have to kind of use your common sense and suss it out.
Makes sense. Thanks very much for that, Doctor. And up next we have Ed. Ed, I am unmuting you, and welcome.
Hi, thank you. Again, just like Deborah, I share a lot of her same feelings about this whole thing. I was skeptical. Now, just like in climate change, you have activist investors, pressuring, oil companies. It seems like this would be also applicable. And likewise, as far as politicians, everything comes down to policy, I think, the big things. Is there, people who are really deep in the pockets who we should work to, vote out of office?
That's an excellent point, Ed. And I forgot to include in the conclusion that if we're going to fix this, continuing on in the direction you're going, if we're going to fix this, the democratic power of the American people has to exceed the political power that the pharmaceutical and other vested healthcare interests are exerting on our politicians. Now, that's a pretty big ask, but there's I believe it could be done with a three-part coalition: healthcare providers demanding access to transparent clinical trial data and independent analysis of that data. In other words, health technology assessment. The non-healthcare related businesses and government that purchases healthcare are getting ripped off, and we're spending an extra $4,500 per person on our healthcare, and the employers are having to spend that to pay that, and for 2.5 family members per employee, that means they're spending more than $10,000 extra in healthcare in healthcare expenses, and it means they're not competitive. So the purchasers of healthcare should be part of this coalition. And then most important is the American people. 80+% think that the drug companies are charging too much and care more about money than they do about Americans' health. Though it's a big task to get those three coalitions to work together to vote out, as you say, the legislators who are not interested in reforming American healthcare in a genuine way. Problem is that there's an enormous amount of drug company money. They make so much money that the money that they invest in their political influence is just a pittance to them, and their pockets are deep. And if the public does get back on, recover from being on its heels about American healthcare, the pharmaceutical industry will certainly up its game. So it's not simple. But 53% of drug company political contributions go to Republicans and 47% go to Democrats. And there are some very progressive Democrats that are taking money as well. And we've got to make it an issue that you can't take drug money and be a good legislator. The American people can't take it anymore. And that coalition is going to have to, the power of the coalition is going to have to exceed the power of the pharmaceutical industry in order to make progress. It's a simple equation.
Amen. And thank you for that. Let me go ahead and bring on Steve. Steve, go right ahead.
Hi, this is Steve. I'm the organizer of The Real Truth About Health. And I just wanted to call in to comment that in making the panels each night, I went through many books and I read a lot of books to get questions. And I did have a chance to completely read Sickening, the book that Dr. Abramson wrote. And I bought it on Kindle and I highlighted it. And I ended up highlighting almost every page. It was an impossible book to edit. There was no fluff. It was nothing but pure information and important information. Based on the importance of the topic, that 23% of the US economy is medical, and based that Dr. Abramson had an insider's point of view, I think this is one of the most important books that's ever been written. And it's impossible to be a healthy person in this world and a smart one if you don't have this information. So if you consider yourself intelligent or you want to participate in intelligent conversations, if you want to take care of your health, it's critical to read what he's saying. It's not hard to understand. I think this could be the most important book you've ever read in your life. I would encourage everyone to go to Amazon, buy 10 copies, read one for yourself, give them to anyone you love and any of your doctors. And I remember The Real Truth About Health has no financial arrangement with Dr. Abramson. We sell no products. We have no affiliate marketing. We have no advertisers. We have no sponsors. The only reason I am speaking now is because I couldn't feel more clear and more honest that this book needs to be shared all throughout the world and as fast as possible. And I don't know what else I could do. I don't know what else I could say. I don't know how to be more urgent, other than this is the only time in the entire conference that I'm calling in to say something like this. So although there's amazing books by amazing people, this one is on a topic that just doesn't seem to get enough coverage. So I really hope you will all go to Amazon, or wherever you go, buy the book and buy 10 copies and give them out to people. So thank you again, Dr. Abramson.
Well, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for being able to participate in the conference.
So I'll go ahead and, okay, we're going to lower your hand, Steve. And of course, thanks to Steve for putting on the entire conference. And folks, when Steve tells you this is the most important book, you have to know, because I know this personally, Steve has read thousands of books, more books than we could possibly imagine. So a lot of weight in what he just said. I'm going to thank you again, Dr. Abramson, as well. We're going to move on now to Mary. We've got a question in from Mary, and there we go. Hi, Mary.
Hey, I have been blessed with a very healthy body. I also feel like I eat well. I exercise pretty well. I know I need to lose weight, but I haven't had to make very many decisions about different medicines. I basically feel like my body, if I take care of my body, it will take care of me. But with the virus that came and me getting older, and people saying you need to get shingles vaccine, you need to, get the flu vaccine each year, which so far I have not done. I have done with COVID. I did do that. How do I even know whether to trust? This was a worldwide disease that came. So I felt like they had my best interest in mind, but there was so much anti-information, and knowing that the drug companies, have this kind of influence. It's like it sounds like I made the right decision. I have had the 2 shots and the next booster, but now, like you're saying, they're saying I need another one. And it's like, how do I figure out whether I should do it or not?
Well, Mary, those are great questions. Thank you very much. As the shots came into the marketplace, it was just about a year ago, or maybe 13 months ago, when shots became available to the public. My own personal feeling for myself was that I was not going to be the first person in line to get the shot, that I don't trust the drug companies, and I know they withhold data. There's no question about that. And I know that they're interested in making money. So I was not the first person in line, but things were pretty bad 13 months ago, if you can remember. And as time went on, I think, do you remember the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was causing a problem with blood clots in the brain? It was pretty serious. The media covered that very well. And I have some faith in the media to pick up on side effects. And as time went on, maybe the vaccinations were out for a month, it became clear from the real world data, not the data that the drug companies had collected, but from the real world data, that the vaccination was very effective at preventing serious illness and death. So it was the real world data that convinced me to go ahead and get vaccinated, and very strongly recommend vaccination for the people I love. Now, that said, it's still a good example of how the drug companies' pursuit of money is undermining the benefit of their therapy, because the World Health Organization and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization and the IMF made very clear about a year ago that if the global vaccination rate, if the vaccination rate in every country didn't get to 60% by the first half of 2022, where we are now, it was guaranteed that variants of the COVID virus would come back into the United States and continue to haunt us. And after they said that, the Delta variant came from India, where the vaccination rate was 4%, and from Africa, where the vaccination rate was 10%. And we know that more variants are coming. We know that. And the vaccination rate in Africa now is still only 16%. It's nowhere near 60%. So while the drug companies are making these spectacularly effective vaccines, they're so insistent on squeezing every dollar that they can from selling the highest fraction of their vaccine to wealthy countries and getting retail prices, that they're willing to let the third world, and in particular Africa, go along with a low vaccination rate that guarantees that the efficacy of their vaccines are going to be challenged by the variants that come along in the future. And it's a bad model. They make a great drug, probably the best drug since the HIV drugs were developed in the 80s and 90s. Fabulous vaccine. They made it in months. I mean, it's just unheard of speed, and we needed it quickly. But this model that the government, our government and other governments, made these purchasing agreements and guaranteed that they would make enormous amounts of money. I mean, Pfizer, the best-selling drug in the world used to be Humira at $20 billion a year, and now Pfizer is selling $33 billion and $36 billion a year. More than half again more than the best-selling drug in history. They're making enormous amounts of money on government. Government is paying for it, and government did not insist that they share their technology and their know-how to create manufacturing sites in the third world. They didn't do it. It's not right, and Americans should not put up with this.
Thanks very much for that. We have, looks like time for one more question, and it's coming in from Mike. Hi, Mike.
Yes, hi. Hi, Dr. Abrams. One question,
Hi.
You piqued my interest when you talked about the A1C numbers being what doctors look at for diabetes and all. And so it got me thinking, my TSH is what my doctor looks at for my thyroid. And while it's a little high based on the ranges, I'm wondering if there's any place that I can look to see if maybe similar to A1C, it's a number that really doesn't have a clinical significance if it's 6.23%, for instance.
I didn't hear the end of your sentence.
Is there looking for information to find out if like a TSH of 6.23 is clinically significant? My holistic doctor says that it should be lower than that. I want to not get onto prescription drugs if I can help it, but that's the one number, and I'm trying to find a way to refute that 6.23 is outside of a good range, similar to the A1C question that you had, where 5.6
exactly.
is too high.
Yeah, Mike, do you know what the upper limit of normal is at the lab that your TSH was measured?
Yes, it says 4.2.
So that it's not a minuscule elevation. I think that I would look at the overall picture of your thyroid results, T4, T3, and put them together into an overall picture, and you have to gestalt that. I obviously wouldn't want to give you medical advice, and frankly, I haven't practiced in 20 years and wouldn't want to give you medical advice. But you're asking a very good question. And minor variations, when I was in practice, minor variations in TSH that were not accompanied by symptoms, we could watch and follow and make sure people weren't having a higher TSH as time went on, and that they weren't symptomatic. So I would say that it's worth taking a look at the whole picture and not treating the number out of context.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Doctor. And with that, we have completed our Q&A session. That's all we have time for. This has been, I'd like to say it's been pleasant. I think it's been an outrage for many of us. And but boy, are we grateful to you for it, and grateful to you for all of the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us. So thank you. Very, very important. And I know I'm not the only one that wants to thank you. If it's okay with you, we're going to unmute our entire audience. What does everybody want to say to Dr. Abramson?
Jackie,
Doc.
come on down or let yourself.